He slid a needle out of the well-worn black medical bag he'd brought with him. He brandished it like a tiny sword. Let her see it. "This needle is called a Tubex," he said. "It's preloaded with thiopental sodium, which is a barbiturate. Does barbiturate sound in things?" He squeezed out a thin squirt of the brown liquid. It looked like iced tea, and it was not something she wanted injected into her veins. "What does it do? What are you doing to me?" she screamed into the tight gag. "Please take this gag out of my mouth." She was covered with sweat, and her breathing was labored. Her whole body felt stiff, anesthetized and numb. Why was he giving her a barbiturate? "If I do this wrong, you'll die right now," he told her. "So don't move." She shook her head affirmatively. She was trying so hard to let him know that she could be good. She could be so very good. "Please don't kill me," she silently pleaded. "Don't do this." He pricked a vein in the crook of her elbow, and she could feel the painful pinch there. "I don't want to leave any unsightly bruises," he whispered. "It won't take long. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. You are so beautiful. 0. All finished." She was crying now. She couldn't help it. The tears were streaming down her cheeks. He was crazy. She squeezed her eyes shut, couldn't look at him anymore. "Please, God, don't let me die like this," she prayed. "Not all alone out here." The drug acted quickly, almost immediately. She felt warm all over, warm and sleepy. She went limp. He took off her tank top and began to fondle her breasts like a juggler with several balls. There was nothing she could do to stop him. He arranged her legs as if she were his art, his human sculpture, stretching the leather thong as far as it would go. He felt down between her legs. The sudden thrust made her open her eyes, and she stared up at the horrible mask. His eyes stared back at her. They were blank and emotionless, yet strangely penetrating. He entered her, and she felt a jolt like a very powerful electric shock running through her body. He was very hard, fully aroused already. He was probing inside her as she was dying from the barbiturate. He was watching her die. That's what this was all about. Her body wriggled, bolted, shook. As weak as she was, she tried to scream. "No, please, 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 don't do this to me." Mercifully, blackness came over her. She didn't know how long she'd been unconscious, didn't care. She woke up, and she was still alive. She started to cry, and the muffled sounds coming through the gag were agonizing. Tears ran down her cheeks. She realized how much she wanted to live. She noticed that she'd been moved. Her arms were behind her and tied around a tree. Her legs were crossed and bound, and she was still tightly gagged. He had taken off her clothes. She didn't see her clothes anywhere. He was still there. "I don't really care if you scream," he said. "There's absolutely nobody to hear you out here." His eyes gleamed out of the lifelike mask. "I just don't want you to scare away the hungry birds and animals." He glanced briefly at her truly beautiful body. "Too bad you disobeyed me, broke the rules," he said. He took off the mask and let her see his face for the first time. He fixed the image of her face in his mind. Then he bent down and kissed her on the lips. "Kiss the girls." Finally, he walked away. Chapter 4. Most of my rage had been spent on the furious foot race to St. Anthony's with Marcus Daniels cradled in my arms. The adrenaline rush was gone now, but I felt an unnatural weariness. The emergency room waiting area was noise and frustrated confusion, babies crying, parents wailing out their grief, the PA incessantly paging doctors. A bleeding man kept muttering, Oh, shit. Oh, shit. I could still see the beautiful, sad eyes of Marcus Daniels. I could still hear his soft voice. At a little past 6:30 that night, my partner in crime arrived unexpectedly at the hospital. Something about that struck me as wrong, but I let it pass for now. John Sampson and I have been best friends since we were both 10 years old and running these same streets in D.C. Southeast. Somehow we survived without having our throats slashed. I drifted into abnormal psychology and eventually got a doctorate at Johns Hopkins. Sampson went into the Army. In some strange and mysterious manner, we both ended up working together on the D.C. police force. I was sitting on a sheetless gurney parked outside the trauma room. Next to me was the crash cart they had used for Marcus. Rubber tourniquets hung like streamers from the black handles of the cart. "How's the boy?" Sampson asked. He knew about Marcus already. Somehow, he always knew. The rain was running down his black poncho in little streams, but he didn't seem to care. I sadly shook my head. I was still feeling wasted. "Don't know yet. They won't tell me anything. Doctor wanted to know if I was next of kin. They took him to trauma. He cut himself real bad. So what brings you to happy hour?" Sampson shrugged his way out of his poncho and flopped down beside me on the straining gurney. Under the poncho, he had on one of his typical street detective outfits, silver and red Nike sweatsuit, matching high-topped sneakers, thin gold bracelets, signet rings. His street look was intact. "Where's your gold tooth?" I managed to smile. "You need a gold tooth to complete your fly ensemble. At least a gold star on one tooth. Maybe some corn braids?" Sampson snorted out a laugh. "I heard, I came," he said offhandedly about his appearance at St. Anthony's. "You okay? You look like the last of the big bad bull elephants." "Little boy tried to kill himself. Sweet little boy, like Damon, 11 years old." "Want me to run over to their crack crib? Shoot the boy's parents?" Sampson asked. His eyes were obsidian hard. "We'll do it later," I said. I was probably in the mood. The positive news was that the parents of Marcus Daniels lived together. The bad part was that they kept the boy and his 4 sisters in the crack house they ran near the Langley Terrace projects. The ages of the children ranged from 5 to 12, and all the kids worked in the business. They were runners. "What are you doing here?" I asked him for the second time. "You didn't just happen to show up here at St. A's. What's up?" Sampson tapped out a cigarette from a pack of Camels. He used only one hand. Very cool. He lit up. Doctors and nurses were everywhere. I snatched the cigarette away and crushed it under my black Converse sneaker sole, near the hole in the big toe. "Feel better now?" Sampson eyed me. Then he gave me a broad grin, showing his large white teeth. The skit was over. Sampson had worked his magic on me, and it was magic, including the cigarette trick. I was feeling better. Skits work. Actually, I felt as if I'd just been hugged by a half-dozen close relatives and both my kids. Sampson is my best friend for a reason. He can push my buttons better than anybody. "Here comes the angel of mercy," he said, pointing down the long, chaotic corridor. Annie Waters was walking towards us, with her hands thrust deeply into the pockets of her hospital coat. She had a tight look on her face, but she always does. "I'm real sorry, Alex. The boy didn't make it. I think he was nearly gone when you got him here. Probably living on all that hope you carry bottled up inside you." Powerful images and visceral sensations of carrying Marcus along 5th and L Streets flashed before me. I imagined the hospital death sheet covering Marcus. It's such a small sheet that they use for children. The boy was my patient. He adopted me this spring. I told the 2 of them what had made me so wild and crazed and suddenly depressed. "Can I get you something, Alex?" said Annie Waters. She had a concerned look on her face. I shook my head. I had to talk, had to get this out right now. Marcus found out I gave help at St. A's, talked to people sometimes. He started coming by the trailer afternoons. Once I passed his tests, he talked about his life at the crack house. Everybody he knew in his life was a junkie. Junkie came by my house today, Rita Washington. Not Marcus's mother, not his father. The boy tried to slit his own throat, slit his wrists. Just 11 years old. My eyes were wet. A little boy dies. Somebody should cry. The psychologist for an 11-year-old suicide victim ought to mourn. I thought so anyway. Samson finally stood up and put his long arm gently on my shoulder. He was 6'9" again. "Let's head on home, Alex," he said. "Come on, my man. Time to go." I went in and looked at Marcus for the last time. I held his lifeless little hand and thought about the talks the two of us had, the ineffable sadness always in his brown eyes. I remembered a wise, beautiful African proverb. It takes a whole village to raise a good child. Finally, Samson came and took me away from the boy, took me home, where it got much worse. Chapter 5. I didn't like what I saw at home. A lot of cars were crowded helter-skelter around my house. It's a white shingle A-frame. It looks like anybody's house. Most of the cars appeared familiar. They were cars of friends and family members. Samson pulled in behind a dented 10-year-old Toyota that belonged to the wife of my late brother Aaron. Cilla Cross was a good friend. She was tough and smart. I ended up liking her more than my brother. What was Cilla doing here? "What the hell is going on at the house?" I asked Samson again. I was starting to get a little concerned. "Invite me in for a cold beer," he said as he pulled the key from the ignition. "Least you can do." Samson was already up and out of the car. He moves like a slick winter wind when he wants to. "Let's go inside, Alex." I had the car door open, but I was still sitting inside. "I live here. I'll go in when I feel like it." I didn't feel like it suddenly. A sheen of cold sweat was on the back of my neck. Detective paranoia? Maybe, maybe not. "Don't be difficult," Samson called back over his shoulder. "For once in your life." A long, icy shiver ran through my body. I took a deep breath. The thought of the human monster I had recently helped put away still gave me nightmares. I deeply feared he would escape one day. The mass killer and kidnapper had already been to 5th Street once. What in hell was going on inside my house? Samson didn't knock on the front door or ring the bell, which dangled on red and blue wires. He just waltzed inside as if he lived there. Same as it's always been. Mi casa es su casa. I followed him into my own house. My boy Damon streaked into Samson's outstretched arms, and John scooped up my son as if he were made of air. Janny came skating toward me, calling me Big Daddy as she ran. She was already in her slipper-sock pajamas, smelling of fresh talcum after her bath. My little lady. Something was wrong in her big brown eyes. The look on her face froze me. "What is it, my honey bunch?" I asked as I nuzzled against Janny's smooth, warm cheek. The two of us nuzzle a lot. "What's wrong? Tell your daddy all your troubles and woes." In the living room, I could see 3 of my aunts, my 2 sisters-in-law, my 1 living brother, Charles. My aunts had been crying. Their faces were all puffy and red. So had my sister-in-law, Cilla, and she isn't one to get weepy without a good reason. The room had the unnatural claustrophobic look of a wake. Somebody has died, I thought. Somebody we all love has died. But everybody I love seemed to be there, present and accounted for. Nana Mama, my grandmother, was serving coffee, iced tea, and also cold chicken pieces, which no one seemed to be eating. Nana lives on 5th Street with me and the kids. In her own mind, she's raising the 3 of us.